Hello and welcome to part 3 of Forgotten Voices of the Second World War. On the last episode, we reached 1940. Don't forget the bookmark. Stick in there. Today we shall be doing Norway. Once, as I was leaving the park shelter and coming back to my house, those all around were bomb blasted, and I saw this woman cleaning the front doorstep of her demolished house as if it were business as usual. With the German invasion of Denmark and Norway in April 1940 and the sudden sweeping assault of Blitzkrieg, Lightning War, across Western Europe, launched on 10th of May, the phony war was over, and Hitler's actions left no doubt as to his ambitions. The Prime Minister, Neville Chamberlain, already discredited for his appeasement of Hitler at the Munich conference, resigned to be replaced by Winston Churchill. Ah yes, good old Winnie. The British Expeditionary Force, woefully outnumbered and under-equipped, fought a rearguard action back to Dunkirk, where it was successfully evacuated. The Germans were poised to invade. Wanting to strike while Britain's armed forces were still in disarray, Hitler needed only air superiority over the Channel to launch an invasion, and on 11th of July, Luftwaffe Commander Hermann Göring promised that his pilots could destroy the RAF in a month. Good luck with that, me old chum. Britain's defence against the coming onslaught was in the hands of Air Chief Marshal Dowding. To him fell the task of directing and garnering the RAF's resources to defend Britain from invasion during the summer of 1940, the Battle of Britain. Despite heavy losses of men and aircraft during the battle, the tide was turned by the end of September. It became apparent that Operation Sea Lion, the invasion, could not go ahead. The Luftwaffe then turned to Britain's cities, initially London and then to industrial centres and ports, to destroy production and terrorise the civilian population. By the end of 1940, Britain stood alone, and it was her citizens who were on the front line, weathering the attrition of the Blitz. Following the evacuation of the BEF from Dunkirk in June, Italy declared war on Britain and France on the 10th of June. Across Europe, around the Mediterranean, the Axis alliance of Germany and Italy launched actions to protect the supply routes from Africa to mainland Europe. In June, bombers attacked Malta, and the following month, Italian troops entered Egypt from Libya, and on 28th of October invaded Greece and Albania, effectively opening up two new fronts. British forces were sent to the defence of Greece, landing on 2nd of November. On the 9th of December, the British attacked the Italians in the deserts of western Egypt. These actions were a prelude to the all-out warfare which would open up the following year. Norway. The first major strike which broke the artificial calm of the phony war came on 9th of April 1940, as the German fleet engaged with British warships sent to lay mines on the waters off neutral Norway to disrupt the routes used for supplying iron ore to Germany. The Royal Navy suffered some losses, and the German fleet continued on its mission to land invasion forces. On the 9th of April, German troops landed at Narvik, Trondheim, Bergen, Kristiansand and Oslo. Although the Norwegians defended bravely and inflicted significant damage on the invaders, they were eventually overwhelmed. Despite efforts by the Royal Navy to come to Norway's aid during the period from 10th of April to the beginning of June, and their success in sinking 10 German destroyers off Narvik, the German invaders still held the town of Narvik itself and had little trouble repulsing a British attempt to land troops at Trondheim. Although the Allies retook Narvik on the 28th of May, the sheer weight of German numbers prevailed, and Norway came under German rule as the last Allied troops were evacuated on the 8th of June. Okay, we're on to our first account. Leading seaman Donald Offret, the wireless operator, Royal Navy, aboard HMS Warspite. When the Norwegian campaign broke out, we were patrolling off Norway, and one evening Captain Crutchley came on the public address and told us that a flotilla of H-class destroyers had entered Narvik Fjord and attacked the merchant shipping in there. They had been attacked by some German Mars-class destroyers and had come off worse, because they weren't as heavily armed as the H-boats. Captain Warburton Lee had been killed and received the VC on the Hardy, and in his words, were going in the next day to clear up the mess. It was very sombre, and I can remember as we came to the entrance to the fjord, we could see the mountains on either side, all grey, topped with snow, and it looked a very, very grim place. The sea was the colour of lead. It looked very forbidding. We closed up for action stations round about 1 o'clock or 12 o'clock. My action station was the bridge wireless office, which gave access to the flag deck. Nothing happened for about 3/4 of an hour, and then all hell let loose, as our main armament was firing. We were getting reports from our swordfish aircraft. Good old fairy swordfish, I love a swordfish. We were getting reports from our swordfish aircraft, which had been catapulted off. He was pinpointing where the destroyers were, because the Narvik fjord had fjordlets off it, and we were firing directly over the bow. The turrets were trained almost fore and aft, and consequently all the blast was coming back aboard. One of the forward hatches was blown off, and all the blast was actually going down into the cable deck. It caused quite a considerable amount of self-inflicting damage. The first view of any of the action I had was when I went out onto the flag deck. At that moment we came abreast of one of the little side fjords. A German destroyer had dodged down there, obviously waiting for us to come around the headland, and when we did, she appeared to fire torpedoes, and these passed under the ship. They were set too deep. At the same time, Warspite fired a broadside, and she was literally lifted out of the water, up onto the beach, and then slid down again. She must have been hit by about 6 15-inch shells simultaneously. The next thing I saw was another German destroyer on our starboard bow, blazing furiously and people jumping into the water. Then one of the tribal class destroyers, the Cossack, went past, and as they did, they cheered us. They were probably glad that we were there to give the heavier firepower. I then went back on watch, and the next signal I remember seeing was from the Swordfish aircraft to say that she'd bombed a U-boat. Good old fairy. Then there was another signal to say that one of the German destroyers was hiding in the Romsbach fjord, at the end of the Narvik town. At the end past Narvik town. One of the tribals, the Eskimo, poked her barrel round and probably had it blown off, but she managed to get her A and B turrets round, and she dealt with that particular destroyer. We then anchored off Narvik and had some German prisoners from one of the destroyers transferred to us, because we could accommodate them more than the tribal class destroyers could. They looked at the damage, and by the look on their faces, they thought they had inflicted it. They were very cocky. The feedback we got from the people who were detailed to be sentries over them was that this was only a very temporary thing, and that Germany would have won in the next 6 months anyway, so they weren't too bothered about being taken prisoner. I heard this with amazement, because it did not ever occur to me that we would lose the war. I wouldn't even consider that fact. We on the Warspite felt that it had been a victory at Narvik. As far as we were told, there were 8 German mass-class destroyers sunk, which was the whole of the German Navy that was in Narvik at the time. Well done, boys. Lieutenant Robert Winter, York and Lancaster Regiment. We were told the plan, and we drew stores, extra ammunition and maps. These maps covered the area of our objective. The plan was that the brigade should capture Trondheim. My platoon was given the task of an assault landing to capture an outpost which had guns on the outskirts of Trondheim. It was to be a mad dash in and seize the post to cover the advance of the rest of the brigade. We practised this on the bleak Scottish hilltop. We were issued with really splendid reversed hide sheepskin coats, similar to an Afghan poshteen, only sweeter smelling. They were lovely, ankle length. They saved our lives in Norway. We landed at Andalsnes in the dark in the early morning and embarked on a Norwegian train of mixed stock. I, being slow getting aboard, found myself in an open coal truck. I was intrigued to notice that the staff captain from the brigade was standing on the footplate of the engine, brandishing a pistol to ensure that the driver took the train. We rode in this train for some number of hours, as far as Donbass. where we trained and bivouacked in the woods outside the town. This was lucky because shortly after arrival, it now being daylight, I witnessed an air raid for the first time. German planes bombed the little town of Donbass. The planes appeared to come slowly and dropped their bombs, which came down and caused considerable damage. This went on throughout the day, including the strafing of anything that moved, civilian or military. To my undying surprise, the company brought down 3 German aeroplanes with small arms fire. I've never seen that happen since. I think the Germans were unused to having opposition, and we were unused to air raids. It was a combination of the two. The carelessness on the part of the Germans, who were low, slow and unworried, and extreme enthusiasm on the part of the British soldiers. We went to a small village south of Otta, and here the battalion sent 1 company forward to assist the King's Own Yorkshire Light Infantry. The remainder of the battalion took up a defensive position across the valley. We set about digging in the normal way, but quickly discovered that the topsoil was only a matter of 6 to 12 inches deep. Thereafter, it was solid rock. This was a distinct blow. The company commander reminded us that if you couldn't dig in, you built up. So we chopped small trees to form sangers, trees reinforced by rocks and filled in with bits of earth. During the night, we were told that the KOYLI would be withdrawing. What's that? The King's Own Yorkshire Light Infantry. I remembered. Would be withdrawing, and we would be at front line. This was successfully achieved with no alarm or excursion. The following morning, we were still completing our sangers and defences when we came under artillery fire. This wasn't particularly harassing because they were some way back, and they were merely firing on the hills and not on any individual targets. We had the odd air raids again. Then about late morning, we started seeing the Germans approaching, coming gradually nearer and nearer. When the tanks came within range, we tried out our boys' anti-tank rifles. This was extremely accurate, but completely ineffective. The projectile simply bounced off the front of the tank. Fortunately, the anti-tank 2-pounders were quite effective. In fact, they were the only supporting weapon we had. As the advance got nearer, they started firing incendiary shells. We were not taking many casualties until we had to replenish our posts. The company commander, Major Walters, a very dashing officer and a first-class chap, led a counter-attack, but unfortunately was killed. We managed to delay the advance until dark, and although we'd lost a portion of our front, the platoon nearest the road managed to hold on. We then got the order to withdraw behind the Green Howards, who were then behind us. This battle was taking place in a long valley, with each battalion behind the other, so we were to withdraw during the night. Having issued those orders to my platoon, it was then discovered that the enemy had got round the flank of the fire of our company and established a post across the middle of the road. So a platoon was sent from one of our other companies to eject it. When our turn came to withdraw, we left the road and went around in a circle, up the side of the hill, getting round behind the Germans. The Germans were terribly keen on incendiary bullets, and they had a much higher percentage of tracer in their ammunition than we had. But they were using so much tracer that my platoon, or what was left of it, managed to crawl safely under the line of the projectiles and get around the enemy and back on the road again. That night, we were to withdraw back to the Donbass by train, which my platoon accomplished successfully. The company second in command was not so fortunate. He was relying on a company of another battalion to his right to tell him when to withdraw, and in the confusion he wasn't warned. When he eventually discovered he was alone and the rest of the brigade had left, he'd missed the train. Undeterred, he started to walk down the railway line, and he came upon one of those 4-wheeled trucks with a lever to propel the vehicle. The sort of truck you see in a cartoon. And between them, they managed to propel this thing and eventually arrived some 3 or 4 hours later in Donbass. By the time I arrived in Andalsnes, I'm struggling with this word, Andalsnes, it was dark, and we moved down to the quay just in time for a really splendid sight of a naval cruiser coming into the jetty in a wonderful flourish, all engines hard astern, rudder far over, and landing with a bang against the quay. It was the quickest and slickest docking I've ever seen. It was the Galatée, and on we trooped to sail for home. Captain Desmond Gordon, 1st Battalion, Green Howards. We were fighting a losing battle from the time we arrived in Norway, so morale was not high. It couldn't be expected to be. Though discipline was remarkably good, most of the men in my company were recalled army reservists who'd served in India with me until being demobilised. So they were seasoned soldiers, and they behaved magnificently. The Germans had about a dozen tanks, which could only be deployed one behind the other on the road. They had come up against almost no opposition until they met the leading elements of the 15th Infantry Brigade near a village called Kvam. There the 10th Company commander had deployed forward 4 of his anti-tank guns and concealed them astride the road, hidden in the gardens of the houses. The company destroyed the first German tank of the war, and that had a remarkable effect in slowing down the German advance. Not only did it block the road, and everything hinged on road movement, but it was an indication to the Germans that they were up against a force better equipped than what they had experienced so far. Unknown to me, the higher command had decided that we had got to be evacuated back to Andelsnes. A train had been assembled in the tunnel at Donbass, which was to take the battalion back. By that time, the Germans had caught up with us, and we were told to hold our position until I got the signal that the rest of the battalion had entrained in the tunnel. For the first and only time in this short-lived campaign, my company was given the support of a troop of Norwegian 25-pound guns. The effect on morale of having these shells going over our heads in the direction of the enemy was incredible. With their help, we literally ran to the train, and I staggered into the very last carriage, completely exhausted. By that time, it was late evening. We came to a halt when the engine hit a bomb crater. We at the back of the train were ordered to get out and get on the road, which ran parallel with the railway line. The commanding officer got hold of the intelligence officer, who'd got a bicycle from somewhere, and said, "Go to the nearest village and find out if there's a tunnel where we can hide." His one thought was that we must get some protection from the German air attack when daylight arrived. He came back and reported that there was one 18 miles away. We marched through the night, and we had just about reached it when the first German aircraft spotted us. We had about 700 men in the tunnel, and there was also a bloody train, which we had to keep steam up, so we were practically suffocated. All that day we sat there with the Germans airbombing us, trying to hit the tunnel, which they failed to do. We stayed there until darkness appeared. Then we got into this train and finally ended up in Andelsnes, which by this time was virtually an inferno. The whole of the fjords around us were just lit up with flames of this little burning town. It was an unforgettable sight. Those aircraft that were bombing us in the tunnel went on to bomb Andelsnes. I found myself on a cruiser, the Calcutta, who hadn't got a single shell left to fire. She tucked herself in under one of the fjords throughout the day, and had fired every single round of ammunition she had to protect herself. I shall always be very grateful for the way the crew received us on board and looked after us during our trip back to Scotland. We weren't in frightfully good shape by that time. We got very little sleep, and we were very, very tired from being continuously on the move and withdrawing. You can sustain yourself when you're advancing and achieving success. You can sustain yourself on short rations, but that's not so easy when you are retreating. Stoker Reginald Redding, aboard the tribal class destroyer HMS Seek. When Germany invaded Norway, we were at sea, and we quickly went across to Namsos. At that time, the Navy sent half of the ship's company of various battleships straight ashore, even before the army had gone in there. We went back and escorted the Empress of Britain to Namsos, as they took the Green Howards in. All the time the Germans were bombing us. Then we went back again with the other destroyers to fetch the troops in, and it was the first time the Green Howards had been in any sort of action at all. Again, all the way up the fjord we were being bombed and our guns were firing. At Namsos, the whole of the jetty was on fire. All of their stores and ammunition were being blown up, but we got them off. We went in again about a fortnight afterwards and evacuated all of those people we possibly could, together with other destroyers. There were very few people that had survived that lot. We did pick up the naval lads. Most of them did get back, but as far as the troops were concerned, they had been really harrowed by the Germans. Anything that was burdening them in any way, shape or form was just left. As we were pulling away from the quay, we could see the German tanks coming over the tops of the hills, down towards the fjord. We were getting out just in front of the German troops. Wing Commander, Kenneth Cross, 46th Squadron, RAF. We were told we would be ferried to Norway by the aircraft carrier Glorious, but that it wasn't possible to land on the carrier because tests had indicated that the deck was not long enough for the Hurricanes to land and come to a stop. They had no hooks as the fleet aircraft had. We taxied the aeroplanes through the fields to jetty, put them on a lighter, and went down to the Clyde, where the Glorious was anchored. We got all 18 aircraft hoisted aboard the Glorious with their cranes, and the next day we set forth for Norway. I had some difficulty with the plan, which we received from the shore as to how the squadron should fly into Scanland. It was proposed that we should go in dribs and drabs. From experience, I thought that this would be fatal, as we could easily be bombed without being able to defend ourselves. We wanted to go in 3 formations of 6. The first one would go in. When it landed, the second one would stay overhead and guard them while they were being refueled and coming to readiness on the ground. Then the second formation would land. Then they would be covered by the third 6. In that way, we would always be ready for action with at least 2/3 of the squadron. The rules of 3. Everything's a rule of 3 in the army. With our variable pitch air screws and the full power of the Merlin engine, our Hurricanes leapt off the deck without any difficulty at all, and we reached Scanland, which was a muddy strip on the edge of the fjord, covered with coconut matting and summer felt tracking. I landed first, and as I came to a stop, the wheels sank in. The aeroplane tipped gently forward, and I bent about 2 inches from my air screw. I was furious, because it was apparent that the airfield was unfit for landing on. 2 days later, the attack on Narvik started. We patrolled Narvik alternately with 263 Squadron in Gladiators. The whole of the time the assault was taking place, no German air opposition was successful. The odd German aircraft, Ju-88s or Heinkel 111s, appeared, and we shot down several during this period. We were in Norway for about 2 weeks. Then the attack on France started. We listened to the news of the German advance. It was a great disappointment to us when the commander told us that the government had decided to evacuate from North Norway because we'd captured Narvik and pushed the Germans right back to the Swedish border. In another 2 weeks, the whole of the north of Norway would have been ours, but we understood that the amount of shipping required to sustain an expedition of that distance up at Narvik was impossible, with the major commitment now being in France. So we were to evacuate. We were told, "We want you to cover the evacuation of the troops from the various fjords by destroyers, and then, when the evacuation is complete, you can either destroy your aeroplanes or you can fly them to the extreme north or Norway to Leitsfeld, where you can dismantle your aeroplanes yourselves, and we will endeavour to get a tramp steamer there. You can load them aboard that way." I declined that course straight away, as I did the proposal to burn the aeroplanes, as we thought they would be needed at home anyway. I asked if we could make an attempt to land on the Glorious. I did the first landing, and in fact it turned out to be a relatively simple operation. My Hurricane stopped a little over 2/3 up the deck. All 7 aircraft came on successfully. We fell into the bunks which were allocated to us. Nobody woke up until mid-afternoon the next day, which was 8th of June. I woke up about 3:30. I went along to the wardroom and having a cup of tea when the action stations were sounded. I assumed that this was another practice. I went along to my cabin and put on my padded Irving jacket. For some unknown reason, I put my squadron funds, amounting to 200 to 300, in an envelope in my inner pocket. I reported to the bridge as the CO of the squadron. For the next 30 to 40 minutes, the ship was steadily hit. After about an hour, or perhaps a little less, the ship began to list very badly. But we were still doing quite a good forward speed, some 12 to 15 knots. We were zigzagging. I thought she should roll over. I thought she would roll over. She had such a list on. Then eventually the order was given to abandon ship. Abandon ship! Carly floats were thrown over the side for the crew and us passengers to swim to when we jumped over the side. I asked the naval pilot what was the form on abandoning ship. He said, when they drop these floats, we're still doing quite a considerable speed, so you want to go pretty quickly afterwards, otherwise you'll have a long way to swim. So when they dropped a float from the quarterdeck, I had my May West on, and I went over the side. Came up like a cork, swam about 10 yards and scrambled aboard the Carly float. Very soon we had 20 or 30 people in the ship. To my great delight, Flight Lieutenant Jameson. Is it lieutenant or lieutenant? I never know. My number 2 in the squadron came swimming along and scrambled aboard the Carly float with me. We sat side by side. Eventually the Glorious came to a halt about half a mile away from us. One moment she was there, then we looked round again and she was gone. It was very rough and very cold. Within a short time, some of the sailors began to die. Within 3 hours, the first died. We had between 20 and 30 aboard our float, but within a few hours, there was only 7 of us left. Savage. And with that, the 10th of May, Blitzkrieg. I think we shall leave it there, ladies and gentlemen. Chin up, tits out, onwards. If you like this, please like and subscribe. Check out the previous video there. Subscribe there. One of these two. Thanks for watching.